The Big Ten Conference Call, supported by the Penn State All Sports Museum, located at the southwest corner of Beaver Stadium. Information on Facebook and at gopsusports.com/museum.
Hi, this is Steve Jones. Well, the Big Ten will have 6 teams playing either on January 2nd or January 3rd. Let's take a look at some of the bowl matchups. First of all, the Gator Bowl, that will take place in Jacksonville January 2nd, Ohio State against Florida. Interesting that Urban Meyer, former Florida coach, is the future head coach at Ohio State. Luke Fickell will coach the Buckeyes in the bowl game. He'll then stay on as defensive coordinator. We bring in the play-by-play voice of the Ohio State Radio Network, Paul Keels. Paul, what has the reaction of the players been to their new head coach?
They're thrilled to have practices, to work at trying to improve, and to also make an impression on their new head coach. Other than that, it's pretty much been business as usual, and the good thing is this team, both players and coaches, have had to deal with that for several months now with all of the off-the-field distractions. So they're kind of taking the same approach that they did during the course of the whole season. Now, it's probably a little more difficult to do with all that's gone on around them this year, but the approach has been pretty much straightforward.
Nebraska and South Carolina will square off in the Capital One Bowl. For Nebraska, their first ever appearance in Orlando as a Big Ten team. We bring in the play-by-play voice of the Nebraska Radio Network, Greg Sharp, and he talked about Nebraska's reaction as fans to getting out of the Big 12 and a new set of bowl games starting with the Capital One.
I think one of the real attractiveness of the switch to the league was to get into some different bowl games. And Nebraska's always recruited the state of Florida pretty well, so to get a chance to get down there a couple of times and maybe a couple over the next few seasons is really exciting, I think, for this fan base and for this program. And a little bit of history for you. Nebraska played in this bowl game, Steve, back when it was still known as the Citrus Bowl in 1991. They lost to Georgia Tech and helped Tech win their national championship that year. So Nebraska would love to get down there and finish off the year with a victory over the Gamecocks.
The Outback Bowl in Tampa will feature Michigan State against Georgia. Mark D'Antonio's had a great record as the head coach of Michigan State, except when it comes to bowl games. We bring in Will Tiemann from the Spartans Radio Network. Michigan State is 7-14 all-time in bowl games. They've never performed well there, Will. And Mark D'Antonio's 0-4. Discuss the importance of them getting off the snide and winning a game like this.
I think if you go back to the beginning, obviously the task was just to get to a bowl game. And in a couple of years, that was a little dicey. But I think in all the matchups, they weren't good. For example, the first time several years ago when MSU played Georgia, Georgia just was too good. Obviously, Alabama was way too good. So it seems like as you go through the list of the 4 losses, MSU was probably in the wrong bowl. They probably weren't good enough to be where they were. And so you work through that process to build it up and get it good. And so I think now Michigan State is where they need to be. I think they could have competed in any bowl they went to this year, outside probably the championship game. But other than that, they're ready to compete. But I think that the issue was not the coaching, not the players. The timing was wrong. The opponent was wrong. But I think all that's changed. And I think this go around, I think everything's lining up pretty good.
January 3rd, it's the All-State Sugar Bowl with Michigan taking on Virginia Tech. That will be at the Superdome in New Orleans. We bring in Frank Beckman from the Michigan Radio Network. And Frank, what kind of job did this coaching staff do this season to bring Michigan back and put them back in the BCS?
I think, number one, they made the players believe in themselves. They didn't come in and immediately create doubt and tore out the talent of the team that they were left. They didn't oversell what was left either. They said, look, we're going to coach these kids up, and our goal is to get better. Our goal is to win the Big Ten championship. The coaches were consistent throughout. They didn't demean the kids. They taught them. They got them to play position football on defense. They got them to pay more attention to just very basics on offense, more attention to running precise routes and hitting the proper hole when the backs had the ball. And I think all of those things that were emphasized over and over as the season went along really paid dividends.
The Rose Bowl in Pasadena will feature Oregon against Wisconsin. We bring in the play-by-play voice of the Wisconsin Radio Network, Matt LePay. Interesting contrast here between Oregon and Wisconsin. Your thoughts on the matchup?
You're talking about teams that score in the mid-40s on average per game. The storylines you'll hear, though, between now and game day will be how well will Wisconsin be able to defend in space against an up-tempo offense, and how well will Oregon be able to handle Wisconsin's more physical style, yet explosive pro-style offense. Different ways to go about it, but, man, it's hard to argue with the success of either team offensively.
And, of course, the Ticketcity Bowl will have Penn State taking on Houston. My partner for the last 12 years on the Penn State Sports Network, Jack Ham, joins me for this. And, Jack, what about the importance, especially for the younger players, of playing in a bowl game?
Well, I think the key thing where a lot of people don't realize is those extra practice days. That's almost like having another spring practice for you when you're preparing for a bowl game. And, you work on a lot of individual skills with some of your backup people. And the idea of also, getting to the point where, you can play your best football when this bowl game comes about. You're off for a long period of time, and you make sure your special team, which can always be a big part of a bowl game, and also the fact that your offense has to come out in sync. And I think that's where the coaches come in, where as you're preparing for the game, you see tired legs, you back off somewhat, or maybe you need a little more contact. That's a feel that Tom Bradley and the whole coaching staff will have to have. And I think so you play your optimum on the day of the bowl game.
So there you have it. January 2nd bowls and a January 3rd bowl. Ohio State will be in action in Jacksonville taking on Florida. The Capital One Bowl will be in Orlando. That will feature Nebraska against South Carolina. Michigan State against Georgia. That will be at the Outback Bowl in Tampa. Michigan on January 3rd takes on Virginia Tech. That'll be at the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans at the Superdome. The Rose Bowl will feature Wisconsin against Oregon. That will be in Pasadena. And, of course, the Nittany Lions on January 2nd against Houston. That game will be at the Old Cotton Bowl in Dallas and will kick off at noon.
The Big Ten Conference Call, supported by the Penn State All Sports Museum, located at the southwest corner of Beaver Stadium. Information on Facebook and at gopsusports.com/museum.